Good evening and welcome to Fridays Live with me, Raj Naik. Today I have with me a very young, dynamic, bold. She's a fashion designer, she's a style icon, and now also to be an actor. Welcome to the one and only Masaba Gupta.
Masaba. Hi. Thank you for having me on your amazing show.
So, what do I call you? Do I call you Masaba or Masu?
You can call me Masu because I'll have to call you Raj, uncle. So then that's settled.
Okay, so tell me, this has always been curious in my, and I've always wanted to ask you, but never got down to doing it. What does Masaba stand for?
Masaba stands for everything individualistic, everything unapologetic, and everything peaceful. I think I'm all those things. I'm individualistic and I'm fierce and everything that people have made me out to be. But I think what I really inherently stand for is just peace, because I love peace. I think when you're at peace with yourself, with what you do, I think you can really be all those other things to the fullest. So I think I stand for peace.
That's nice. I mean, in today's day and age, most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is peace. Yeah. But what does Masaba mean?
Masaba means princess in Swahili.
Wow.
It's a Swahili name and it means princess. In other languages and other cultures, I believe it also means, it's also a particular type of fish. But yeah, she apparently was a princess in African mythology. So yeah, that's the one I like to go with.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, you are a princess. There's no now maybe queen.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So I've known you for many years, but one of the things about knowing people, and especially in today's day and age, you know people so well, and yet you don't know them.
Yeah.
And that's true even with people whom you work with. Everybody, you know them, you socialize, you do, but you really don't know them, because there are certain things you don't get down to asking, speaking, and things like that, because you just go with the flow. So I want to get to know you better today.
Great, can't wait.
So tell me, so let's start with your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your childhood like, and what were the challenges that you faced growing up as a young kid?
Contrary to what people believe, I think I had a perfectly normal childhood. And I think I say that because I think the line between normal and not normal is a bit blurred, and I think when you're a child, you don't really see that difference as such, because what's normal to you may be abnormal to somebody else and vice versa. So I had a very happy childhood to begin with. Extremely sheltered, I have to say, a very protected child, because I was the only child. And as you know, mom raised me single-handedly. So it was very sheltered, I was very protected. I think I grew up around people that were safe. I wasn't really exposed to things as I think a child should be. So I think that was my upbringing. But later on, when I was growing up in my teen years and things like that, I think I finally opened up a bit. I was a very angry child. I was a very angry teenager. And I think a lot of that came from not really understanding why I was given so much attention. And sometimes that attention was negative, sometimes it was positive, but I think just all the scrutiny around my life and things like that, I think that made me very angry, because I thought everything was fine and I thought everything was normal. So that was that. I played a lot of sport as a child growing up. I think that was my alter ego. It was my other life, which I think I used that as a way of venting all the things I felt, because I was a very shy kid. I didn't speak much. I took it all out on sport. I played tennis professionally. I played football, handball, you name it. And I was an outdoors kid. We're very happy with my very few friends and family. And I think all of you became my family. So growing up, that was very special. But I just wish that I had been thrown out and been able to, you know, just roll in the dirt a bit, not literally, but you know what I mean. Just from a perspective that, you know, when you throw a child out and let them learn how to walk and get up on their 2 feet, I think that was something I missed. Because you become used to the sheltered life as you grow up, and then you expect that to continue into your adult life, and that doesn't happen. So yeah, a very angry but happy child, to put it.
So when you were angry, I mean, where was it manifesting from? I mean, would you go and speak to your mother about it when you were angry, or you just?
I like I said, I wouldn't speak to her. I wouldn't speak to anyone really. I was very quiet. You know, I think I internalize things a lot, and I would just take it out on the tennis court. So I was a really aggressive tennis player. And I think one of the things that happened was I couldn't pursue it professionally because I remember I had a lot of strength, and that strength came from having all of this anger inside of me, but I never knew how to channelize it to my benefit. So I think it came out there, it came out in, you know, in school, at class, it came out with friends sometimes. Interpersonal relationships were always a bit flawed, but all in all, I think I turned out okay.
So, but did you always wanted to be a designer? I mean, before this, did you think of pursuing something else before becoming a designer?
Design pursued me, actually. I think I just wanted to be somebody who was in front of the camera. I just wanted to be.
You are, right now, you are in front of the camera.
Exactly. So I remember I started off wanting to be a dancer. So I danced for many years with Shamak Davar, and I really enjoyed that. I would dance for hours in a day, and I had to literally be dragged home. Post that, I decided that I wanted to become a singer. So I went to London and I studied music. I studied various types of music, R&B mostly, and I studied the keys. And then, of course, thanks to the sheltered upbringing, I said, I miss my home and I miss my garga khana and I miss my didis. So I want to come back home and I want to be in a safe space. And in those 2 or 3 months, I think I wanted to act. But, you know, mom, she said, nothing doing. You're not a conventional Indian face. It's going to be really hard for you. So pick something that will last you your whole life. Pick something where you have to use your mind. Pick something where, you know, it's not a profession so largely dependent on physicality, which I thought was very interesting. And yeah, next thing I know, we were crossing Anupam Kher's School of Acting. And I said, Mom, I want to go there. She said, no, there's SNDT right next to that. Go there. So literally took a U-turn, went right in. And then from then on, there was no looking back.
Interesting, because, you know, a lot of people plan their life saying, I want to do this. And most often, and what ends up is doing something completely different. And like you said, and so nobody in your family was into fashion, right? Nobody.
Not at all. We're a Gupta family with heavy account brains. So I'm the opposite.
Okay. So when you finished your design school, I mean, because this is not an easy industry. It's like Bollywood. I mean, it's a very, very challenging industry. It's very, very tough, very tough. But you suddenly seem to have made that breakthrough, you know, and at a very young age. So where did that come from? I mean, how did that happen?
In hindsight, I think the fact that I was all of 19 and I was so fearless and I had nothing to prove. And I have to say, I have to admit that I was thinking of it the other day. If I had tried my hand at acting then, or cricket or a sport, I would have definitely said, I have to win at all costs because my parents are such overachievers in their fields. And when I did fashion, I said, you know, there's no pressure on me because if I fail at this, history will not
accuse
me.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, history will not say, oh my God, her dad was a great cricketer, her mom was a great actress, and she failed at fashion, you know. So I think I just didn't have any pressure. I was very spontaneous. I was very happy to fail because I was a teenager, like literally coming out of my teens and giving something a shot. So I went at it with absolute, without any fear, no inhibitions whatsoever. And I think that's the reason I was able to actually be myself and bring that out in my craft. So that happened. I didn't have any pressure to start a label or to have 50 stores. I didn't know what the business of fashion is. I just knew I liked pretty things, and I knew that I knew one thing for sure, there's a gap in the market for the kind of work I do. Because I had been to fashion weeks and I said something's missing. And I said, maybe I can provide that thing that's missing. And then there I was. So like I said, when you're not afraid to fail, you can do so much better.
So tell me, I mean, how did Masaba is your name, and then you chose a label with your name. It's a big risk to take, right? Because you're identifying yourself with the brand. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me, whose idea was it? I mean, who decided that we should go with this name? Was it your mother? Was it you? Or somebody else in the family or friends? Who was it?
No, it was entirely me. I thought that if I'm doing something, why call it something else? Secondly, I think I found that my name was a bit unique for India. There was a lot in the market already with other things, and people called their labels various things. No one really identified with a few. Some, of course, did extremely well. But I knew that I didn't want to be anonymous. I didn't want to be an anonymous label. I knew that if I'm designing for it, then it will carry my name. And yeah, that's it. I think I was in a shop in Dadar, a printing shop, and I said, can you make this logo for me? All I knew is I want a bindi on it. And I said, I'm just going to call it Masaba. Because actually it was just so quick, because I had to get I had to send an invoice or something. So I had to just decide instantly. So it was like that. And I never gave it thought. I think it all just happened.
Why did you want a bindi on it? Because, it's so funny, when we launched NDTV with Dr. Punit Roy, Mrs. Radhika Roy wanted a bindi on it. If you see NDTV logo has a bindi on it. Actually, the logo had come, she took the bindi and she put it there and she said, this is what our logo is going to be. So I want to ask you this question. Why did you want a bindi on it?
I think for me, the circle is my center of gravity at a more spiritual level. So when I made the logo, I remember it was the Devanagari font. It was Masaba. And I kept looking at it, and it was black and white the way it is today. Of course, the logo, the bindi that time was off center. It was on the right. And I looked at it and I said, there's something missing. I'm not feeling at peace with it. And
you wanted to add a bit of color to it.
No, it was not even color. It was actually just something to bind it. You know how you miss that one thing to bind everything? And I said, you know what, it should just be a bindi, because whenever I look at the bindi, I feel like everything has come together. So like I said, it was my center of gravity. And I said, if I'm starting this label, I need a center of gravity for the brand. And I thought that that's the logo. And it's interesting that whenever I find myself at, a bit anxious or unable to make a decision about the label at a creative level or at a business level, I always look at my logo, and it always centers me and brings me back to my perspective.
You found a sweet spot for yourself. I mean, that's very interesting what you just said. Something to bring you back.
Yeah.
To get back your focus. But I was just thinking, designers usually either it's high end or it's what you call what you find in or things like that. But you managed to find a sweet spot for yourself. You were not mass, neither you were very high end. You found that you carved a niche for yourself. I mean, where did that business acumen come from? Or what was there somebody advising you, or was it your research? What was it?
No research, nobody advising me, but just a gut feeling. And I think because I was a consumer myself, I'm a big consumer of fashion, always have been. And when we started off, it was just me and my mother who started the label. And, we just said, we're going to make clothes we want to wear. Or we're going to make clothes that my friend's wife wants to wear. And the only thing I knew was, the only thing I researched upon was, what is the pricing going to be? Designer wear is notorious for being expensive, especially if it's everyday wear. And I said, you know what, I'm going to enter this gap, because I feel like people shouldn't be intimidated by the brand. So if you see something and you like it, you should be able to buy it, you know. That was the only thing I knew as a young girl. I said, if I'm making something, whether it's everyday wear or it's occasion wear, it should be affordable. Having said that, today affordability is a very subjective thing. You have to keep adapting to it. What may be affordable to somebody may not be affordable to the other. So we keep changing, we keep adapting, we keep adding entry-level products, as I say, to the brand, so that a 16-year-old girl can walk away with something, as well as a 60-year-old woman can walk away with something.
Okay. And tell me, you achieved success at a very young age, very. So how is it to stay grounded? How difficult is it? Or because you somehow managed to keep your feet firmly on the ground. I know you as a person, so I can say that.
I don't like badly behaved people. I think I look at people and I say, I want to be like this one, and I don't want to be like this one. And I think the ones who are arrogant, the ones who are flying too high because of some milestone that God knows will exist or not tomorrow. I just think that life is short, the world is round, and you meet the same people over and over again. And sometimes you're on top, sometimes you're at the bottom. So I think I just like to be at a grounded level. I think I don't find any reason to be flying. I think that I do good work, and I hope to continue to do good work and to be recognized for it. I think bad behavior is no excuse, even if you're an overachiever, is what I think.
So what have you been doing last few months?
Last 2 months have been lockdown in Goa.
Oh, you're in Goa?
Yes, I'm in Goa. I'm in Goa. I've been
Nice
locked down here. Yeah, lovely place to be. We got here mid-March, just I think 2 days or 3 days before the lockdown. And we've been here. It's actually been great, because I've had the time to really re-evaluate my whole life, which I think is a cliche, but I think all of us are going through it at some level. And I've not been designing, to be honest. I have actually been taking care of the business side of things. As you may know, fashion is suffering, the business is suffering at the moment. So all of my attention is there. And I would say I've been firefighting for the past 2 months, but very happily, firefighting in nature. So it's good. It's great.
So what has been the impact for your business at this moment?
It's been really tough. It's actually at the store levels, retail is something I think that has taken the largest hit. We employ over 150 people. So making sure that they're well, making sure that they're taken care of, both emotionally and financially, has been a challenge. And I think the fact that overnight, most stores, we have 11 stores in the country, most were signaled to be shut. Now that we're opening them slowly, we don't know what lies on the other side. And I think fashion, I always believe, whenever there's a crisis of any kind, is always at the bottom of the food chain. So that explains itself. You know, it means that when people start to have some sort of feeling of spending money or wanting to splurge on something or go out, fashion might be the last thing, or it might be the first thing. We don't know. So I think we're sitting in between two scenarios with a lot of uncertainty whether the brand will stay afloat or not. But I think it's an everyday work. I think every single day that the brand exists now is a blessing. And we've taken a hit, of course, financially in a big way. You know, we have stock that is lying for the past many months that hasn't been touched. but we're finding ways to survive. So we're in survival mode at the moment.
So what is the one thing that you learned out of this whole crisis, both professionally and personally?
Personally, nothing is in your control. No 5-year plan or 10-year plan is going to save you from a pandemic that nature has caused. The only plan you should have is of how you will survive tomorrow. I think that at a personal level, taking each day as it comes, trying not to stress out, even though I'm generally a stressed out person, but I'm trying not to stress out too much and see things from a very objective point of view. And I think professionally, to be able to emotionally detach yourself from the work you do and see it from a very different perspective. So if you see it from a third person's perspective, an outsider's perspective, and see that you're not emotionally invested in it, you have to cut the cord. As an entrepreneur, you have to cut the cord with what you do and with what your image is, with what people will say, with PR, and just stay afloat. That's what I've learned.
It's so true. I mean, I think one thing this pandemic has done is people have stopped judging others, and people actually don't give a damn about what others are thinking about you. Because I think this has been a great learning experience for everybody, that nothing is certain. Nothing is certain, anything can happen anytime. And it's sad. I mean, I think you and I are still far more privileged in many which ways.
Absolutely.
Compared to a lot of others who are going through a really, really bad time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think privilege, that's the thing about it, which I was discussing earlier today. There's no right or wrong, right? I mean, it's a funny thing, but somehow there is this hate towards privilege that I've seen of late, at least on the internet. And maybe people decide, or they assume that people who are in a position of privilege are just sitting back and counting their cash, but that's not the case. I mean, the only thing that's apt to say at this point is that everybody's in the deep sea. Somebody's in a better boat, somebody's in a really fancy yacht, somebody's just drowning. They don't have a boat, and I think that's what it is. So we have to accept and be empathetic towards each one scenario. And if we have it in our hands, and if we have the power to help one that doesn't have a boat to survive, we must go out and do that every day. I think our survival, or a human being's individual survival, is very, very linked and connected to the survival of the whole world. And I think if we are surviving, we should be thinking at all times about how other people are surviving as well.
Yeah, no, very well said. Because I think this is one time where I think people have also realized that, you don't really need so much to live, I know a lot of people who stop wearing jeans, they're only in shorts at home.
Tell me about it. So have I. Well, I'm living out of a suitcase here with about 5 or 6 outfits. Very happy.
And you don't miss anything.
I don't miss anything. And somebody told me, don't say that you're a designer, but it's the truth. Fast fashion might be going out of the way, and slow fashion might be coming back.
Yeah. No, interesting. So one last question, because I want to move away from business. I want to get you to know you better, but I couldn't resist asking because this is a scenario. But there's one thing that you learned, because I know a lot of people are watching, and there are a lot of people for whom you're a role model and you're an inspiration, especially the young entrepreneurs. They see you as somebody who's achieved success. If there's one thing you would like to say to them, to young entrepreneurs who just started, not just in the design business, in any business, and they're going through turmoil at this moment, if there's one messaging you would like to give to them, what would it be?
Okay, so I have one messaging, but 3 pointers in my head. One is, stick to doing what you're good at. If you are good at finance, do that. If you're good at fashion or creativity, do that. If you're good at basketball, only do that. Don't try and buy a basketball team just because you know how to play basketball. That's one thing. The second thing is conserve cash. I think it's very important to save money for a rainy day. I think all of us, you know, especially in retail, sometimes what happens is you're living literally hand to mouth, you know, every single day. It's like being on a daily wage almost. But conserve cash. You never know how things might turn. That's the second thing. And the third thing, be very open and learn to adapt. Always remember that every day is different. Some days there might be 8 competitors standing right in front of you. Sometimes there may not be any competitors for 10 years, but learn to adapt. If you don't have the power to adapt and change your business model, and I'm talking about overnight, you will suffer. Yeah.
Okay, that's very heavy, and you know, it's very a mature advice coming from somebody so young as you. And
I've learned the hard way, so.
but it's very good. I mean, cash is king today, and you know, it's very important for young entrepreneurs. I would just add to that. I would say that, you know, one of the things about being an entrepreneur is entrepreneurs take risk, and you took that risk. And sometimes there will be things not in your control.
Mhm.
The thing is not to lose heart, and
Yeah.
just to hope that, you know, and see how best you can make of the situation, and
Absolutely.
yeah, and wait for things to pan out, because some of things are not in your control. Don't try to make big plans like Masaba just said. Forget the 5-year plan. Just hold on, let the storm pass. You will know what the damage is, you'll know what the situation is, and then you can probably then react to the situation.
And I think the last thing I forgot to say was keep moving, never stop. Keep doing something or the other. If you feel like there is a change in the market, the shift in the market, always listen to your consumer. They're telling you exactly what they want. If you listen to them, you will keep moving. I think the wheel never has to stop turning. If you're an entrepreneur, no matter how you feel, no matter how things are, you have to show up every single day.
Okay. I can't stop getting away from your work. I'm trying my best to go on, but,
Okay, let's
but,
move.
but one or two things that is in my head, so I have to get it out. You have been very, very, what do you say, open to collaborations. You've done great collaborations, and something very unique in the way you've done it, whether it's with Amrapali Jewelers, Game of Thrones, or Nykaa, and many other brands. Again, where does the business acumen come from, and where did it, how did you, you've been very proactive in this stuff, in this space.
I don't know if I could call it business acumen. I don't know if I can necessarily put numbers down near a product that I want to launch, but I have people that I've hired for that because it's something I didn't really know. I'm learning as we go, but I think I just feel like I have a pulse on what might be the next big thing. I just feel like makeup, for example, I felt really bad that no Indian designer had their own line of makeup. Now, of course, a lot of them have it, but I just felt like, you know, abroad you have individuals, you have personalities, you have so many fashion brands who diversified into various categories. And whenever I've seen myself, I've never seen myself as an individual. I've seen myself as a lifestyle. So I always say to people that Masaba is a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle brand. And we don't stop. You know, we do socks, we do makeup, we've launched perfume recently, we've done watches, we've done jewelry, like you said. I've also designed shower gels, you know. So I feel like it's just having my pulse on what might be the next thing that might catch on and what people are lacking. So I think that's just something I understand, and I reach out. I literally pick up the phone on brands and say, guys, do you want to collaborate? I love the work you do, and I don't have the resources you have, so let's do this together. So in a way, it's also a way of experimenting what the label could finally come to stop at. So clothes, of course, are there, but eventually, what will the label be 10 years down the line or 5 years down the line? So we've done our experiments, and we'll see where we land up.
You are very popular on social media. I mean, on Instagram in particular. Is there a lot of pressure on you in terms of the way you have to behave in the social media environment, given that you are a brand by yourself, then the brand is named after you. And so do you find a lot of pressure there? I mean, how you, because, when we put stuff on Instagram, we don't need to bother. We just put it out, right? But do you have to, because it can impact your brand in some way or the other. So do you
Yeah.
sometimes have to think it through when ever you post something on Instagram? Or you don't, or it's a personal thing, personal space?
If it's a personal post, if it's about something I'm feeling or an opinion I have on something, or a photograph in a bikini, I don't think that much, even though I know that there might be some kind of backlash for it. Because as far back as I remember, social media, Instagram was meant to be your way of expressing yourself. It was meant to be free speech. Today, it's more about cyberbullying. But I think when it comes to the brand, I have to admit I'm careful, because I don't want to come across as insensitive. I don't want the brand to land in hot water because I believe in some bizarre theory about something. I always tell my team that handles my brand page, I always tell them that everything you do it with sensitivity. People are really angry these days. People are feeling a lot of things globally. I think we've been in hot water for so many years now, that I think I'm careful. I'm careful in my own way, but I'm not careful in a way that I'm going to muffle my voice. I'm careful to the point where I know that I shouldn't have stones pelted at my store. I shouldn't put my workers at risk. And just because I have an opinion about something, or I feel strongly about something, my brand should suffer. I see my brand as a completely different entity. I see it as a different person. So I always sort of, divide the two in my head.
Nice. So tell me, I mean, because you are so much on social media, how real is life on social media versus real life? I mean, do you think there's sometimes, a lot of people, their real life and life on social media, I'm not able to articulate. I think you got what to say. How real is it?
Well, mine is super real.
Not
Because
necessarily referring to you, but generally.
Generally, I would say 50-50. I mean, without taking any names, I think I know enough people who have very different views when you sit with them at a dinner party, and when they're on social media. And I think when everyone puts up quotes and, about how you're the right person, people should love you and this and that. And then I said, okay, well, then no one's really bad. Everyone feels like they're really important and should be really loved. But I know for a fact that there's a lot of people who don't necessarily believe in ideas, that they always say, oh my God, we should be on Instagram and we should say this because it's the current trend, which is okay, I think, because to each their own. I think a lot of people live off that adulation. They live off that constant, validation that comes from social media. And I have a problem with being fraudulent, but I mean, to each their own.
So tell, what is your favorite holiday destination? We've done a lot of holidays together. I want to ask you, what's your favorite holiday destination?
The Maldives.
Why?
Why? Because I love the sun, I love the ocean, and I think I'm an island girl at heart. So I have it in my genes, I have it in my blood. So I think the minute you take me to a nice, warm, tropical climate with the sea in front of me and wonderful company like all of you, I feel like I'm at home.
So have you been to the West Indies?
I have. I've been to the West Indies very, very little, but I have. I've been. I haven't been for the past 2-3 years now, but I've been, and it's lovely, and it feels like home each time I go.
So, and what's your relationship with your father there at this moment?
It's a nice, charming one. It's not overly close. It's not overly distant. I know that I can pick up the phone on him anytime and reach out, and I know that he'll always be available on the other line with enough and more good advice. but it's not a relationship that I lean on. It's not a relationship that I thrive off. I look up to him. I admire him. I believe in a lot of, he's chosen a certain way of life. I think we all know that. A life away from public glare, a life away from everything. He only plays golf and eats fish. So I think it's nice. He lives a little bit of an isolated life. And I think now that I'm turning a bit older, I'm slowly becoming like that.
So you take it more from your mom or from your dad?
Oh God, the problem is it's such a heady mix because the two of them, as you know, are so apart from each other. I think my mom she likes going out, and she has lots of friends, and she wants to work and she wants to actively do things. My dad's like, I did my bit for the world, for world cricket, and I'm just going to play some golf now and not own a phone for some time. So I think I'm a bit of both, but I think eventually I will land up exactly like my dad. I have more of his temperament. I have more of his nature in me, and I think I eventually will live a very isolated life.
And what's your relationship with Nina?
Mom is, of course, like I said, the exact opposite of my relationship with my father. It's something I thrive on. I speak to her every day. She's my number one critic, and a very harsh one at that. And she's somebody who I admire. She's somebody who I always find solace in. And more importantly, I think she's a friend. We're like two sisters. We can talk about anything. And we both have this telepathy of sorts. Whatever I'm thinking about a certain event in my life, she's somehow thinking the same thing. We're both very attached to our gut, and we sync at that level. So it's great.
And how often have you been speaking to each other during this lockdown now that you're in Goa? And she's somewhere in Mussoorie or somewhere, right?
She's in Mukteshwar.
Mukteshwar.
We speak twice a day, but she's really busy, as you see, baking cakes and on Instagram. So I think she's found that millennial blogger life now at the age of 65. And I think it's amazing. She's had a rebirth of sorts, and we speak, but we've been speaking largely about work because she is on the board of directors in my company, and I'm going to her for advice now.
Yeah. No. So I want to move away from thing and ask you, there's something specifically I wanted to ask you when we were speaking about your mom, and just it was a birthday yesterday, isn't it?
Yes, it was her birthday yesterday. And was it about her new sort of second innings?
No. Now it's come. So,
okay.
I mean, now both of you are going to act together in Netflix, right?
That. Okay, that. Okay.
The one thing about the formal chat, is like
yes.
you have to keep thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, we are. Unfortunately, I can't say too much, but since you're Raj uncle, I will. we are doing a show together. It's called Masaba, and it's going to be on Netflix soon. Soon is when I don't know, but it's inspired actually by life events in my mom's life and my life, but it's also scripted. So it's more of a mockumentary. Very new concept for India, never been done before, I think, in the country. But it was great. I think, acting with her was my first ever shot was with her, and there was no dialogues in it. So I had to just emote. And I thought I was going to die because I thought my mother's going to judge me because you know how she'd be like, you're so bad. So I just went completely crazy. But thanks to a lot of work I did on myself before I started filming, I was able to block that out and just do what I came there for. And then I forgot that's my mom in front of me. I just thought it's a co-actor. And it was great. I can't wait to be on set again.
Would she give you tips, or would she correct you at times?
Very little, and she actually wrote to me right after the first day of shoot and said, she sent me a message because I didn't think she could tell me in person. She said, I'm a bit surprised at your acting abilities because I thought you really wouldn't be able to manage, you know, because I was a very shy kid and I was not really like out there and all that. But she was very
Shy
impressed.
now, you're not shy now. Now you're anything but shy.
I'm anything but shy now. But yeah, she was very impressed. And the only one time I remember, we were shooting one day, and we were doing this scene, and it was just us like talking to each other. And she said, "Ah, "Kitna bura kar rahi hai."
That's typical Tina.
Can you imagine? And the whole set has frozen because they didn't know what whether they should laugh or they should just keep quiet, and everyone's like chuckling under their breath, and it was really funny. But I love it. Yeah, I think that's what parents should be. They should tell you exactly what it is and not let you do some kharab kaam and let it pass. So I'm glad, because then I redid the scene, I worked on it, and I got it. You know, so otherwise I would have just looked bad. So yeah.
You know, Masu, at the beginning of the interview, you said you wanted to be an actor, and now you got a chance to be an actor, and you are acting, and your show is coming out soon, Masaba Masaba. But is that something that you'd want to pursue as a career post in the future as well?
My first priority and my first baby, as they say, is fashion. It's my label, and it always will be. But I'm never going to say no to anything ever again in my life. I think if I get opportunities to act some more, very happy to. I will, of course, see that it doesn't come in the way of my work, or I will manage it in such a way that I can do both. Because I am a workaholic. I'm happy to work hard. I'm happy to work at different things. I don't want to stop at one thing. I think people limit themselves so much. We have one life. You should do as much as you want to, you know. And I really enjoy acting, and I really want to do more of what I enjoy doing. So when like when I'm sitting with my pen and paper and my girls in office and designing, I feel the same rush when I'm in front of the camera. And so if I were given the opportunity, very happy to. If not, then I'll quietly keep designing on the side.
Yeah. No, I'm sure many opportunities will come your way, especially now that you said it. It's out there that is willing to consider offers that comes away. I'm sure you'll get many more offers. So tell me, how do you stay so positive? What is your mantra for positiveness? For for being that chirpy, bubbly, giggly, if I have to use that word.
I have to say I'm not always like this. I have very dark moments, and I'm a big sulker. I sulk a lot. I can like wallow in self-pity for days and hours, and it's a very bad habit. But I think the one mantra of my positivity is I don't put any pressure on myself to be positive. You know, I don't put pressure that, oh my God, this is a bad thought, get it out of the way. I just allow myself to feel what I have to feel so that I don't feel it anymore, you know. And that's it. And more than that, I think I've realized that I'm very grateful. I have much more than I've asked for. I really believe I'm Destiny's child. I don't know how I've landed up here. I I was meant to be, you know, that kid you read about in the papers in the, you know, late 80s, or like, where is she? Who's she? Oh my God, she's this child and she was born like this and da da da. And I'm here. So I have so much, and I have much more than I asked for, could ask for. I have great friends, great family. I have all of you guys who become family. I have a label. I have the ability to uh, marry art with commerce and make a label out of it. So, and now I have the ability to act, which I always wanted to do, and I'm doing it on my own terms. I'm not playing some, you know, that dark girl from somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm playing myself. I'm not being given, oh, she's a character artist, so she's niche, or she, you know, she looks a certain way, so she's from there. I'm playing myself. So I really am blessed. So I don't have much to sulk for. After 3-4 hours, I'm like, enough now. You have a lot. Please stop sulking.
Yeah. So we don't have much time left. So this is one question I keep asking everyone. So what are the three things that make you happy? And what is your definition of happiness?
I think my definition of happiness is being at peace with a decision, no matter how wrong or right it might seem. Or just being at peace with the current situation, no matter how bad, unfortunate, sad it might be. And just being still. I think that's my definition of happiness. The things that make me happy, food, as you know. I love food, and I don't ever want to deny myself. I only work out so I can eat. And the second thing is being connected to people. I like people. I like depending on people. I like human touch. I like human connections. I like, having an unexplained connect with people that are sometimes much older, sometimes much younger. Like I have with Atiya. It's she's not my age, but we have this amazing friendship, sisterhood. I don't know what it is. So it's like that. And the last thing is knowing that my parents at least feel half good about having me. That gives me happiness. That I didn't let them down. That I didn't become, I didn't become one of those children that you don't talk about. But I think that they're happy that they had me, that they're happy with the choices I made, and that they support them. Yeah.
No, I'm sure they're not just happy, they're very, very proud of you, Masaba. And thank you very much for this. I enjoyed, we haven't spoken in the last 2 months, but
exactly.
I enjoyed this chat.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you.